Yeah, morning everybody. Name's Chris Proud. I'm territory born. I was born in Alice in '64. I was adopted at a very young age. I was only a few weeks old. Parents took me over to Cancoban in New South Wales because Dad was working on the Snowy Mountain scheme back in the '50s and '60s, and from there we moved back to Adelaide. Then both Mum and Dad being South Australian, we ended up going back to Adelaide, where I spent the next 15 years. So I went to good school there. I practically grew up by myself. The two biological brothers were probably about 25 years older than me and had left home by the time I came along. I had a really good childhood, great school. You know, a lot of the guys I'd gone from kindergarten through to when I left the school in year 11. So, you know, a lot of us had known each other for, decades. And that was really good, made things good. I did have a break in that time. Dad transferred with work to Port Moresby in New Guinea and went up there in 1970 and lived there for 3 years. And which was a real cultural change. It's obviously pre-independence for PNG. It was great. I loved it up there. It was still just natural jungle, and it was a boy's childhood dream to go exploring. And it was literally at the end of the street sort of thing. We moved from Port Moresby to Lae for a year, and then went back to Port Moresby. And when I came back, I had all these stories to tell my classmates, because I rejoined my class, and I don't think anyone had missed me. They were just like, "Hi Chris, you're back." And I thought, well, that was it. So I never got to tell the really good stories. And then Dad being ex-Second World War Navy veteran, he never really spoke about his service much, but I knew snippets and that, and I always had a thing for the ocean. Where we lived in Adelaide was pretty close to the ocean, same as I am here in near Rockingham in WA. And I don't know, the ocean just been calling me, which is quite funny considering I was born in Alice in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the country. So, but I just love his stories, and I was sort of getting a bit wayward and led astray by, not my schoolmates, but the suburbs we lived in were a bit riff-raffy at that stage. So, I was starting to get a bit of trouble with cops and stuff and doing stupid things. And a cop grabbed me one day, and he shirt-fronted me, and he pulled me aside and he said, "You're smarter than any of these people." He said, "Now, this is the only time I ever talk to you." And he said, "Do something with your life." And I thought about it. He really put the hard word on me and said, "Look, these guys are destined for jail more." And he said, "I know you better than that." So, I really took that on board, and because I had an interest with the Navy, I asked Dad if I could join the Navy Cadets. So I joined the Navy Cadets at age of 12 and absolutely loved it, and, met real great people. It was good to get out of the bad crowd, just to meet all these guys, and we all had the same love for the ocean, and and really bonded. And I always wanted to. I used that then I want to join the Navy. I really want to join the Navy. Now I played trumpet for probably about 10 years, and I thought, I'm over school. I'm really over school. I was turning 14, nearly turning 15. So I went I applied for the Navy for the band as a musician, and went and did all the tests and that, which were bloody hard. Trust me, it was really hard. And I had to sit in a room with probably about 8 people that were qualified musicians and do everything from, they'd play me a tune, I'd have to tap the tune back with a pencil, and they'd give me music I'd never played before to see how it go. Anyway, I did okay, and they told me, "Look, I passed all the exams and that, but there wasn't any vacancies for brass players." And they said, look, would you be interested in going to woodwind? I thought, no. You know, I've just spent all these years perfecting brass, totally different, you know, chalk and cheese. And I was really disappointed because I thought that was my way to get out of school at that age. And the recruiting office, they said to me, would you like to go for junior recruit at HMAS Lewin here in Fremantle and try for that instead? And I thought, yeah, well, they were only taking 60 out of the whole of Australia, and they had 5,000-6,000 applicants. It was the thing to do as a young boy. You know, nowhere else could you join at 15 3/4. Well, I got accepted, and I was literally over the moon. Dad was proud as punch, you know, and I actually got told that I was too young for that intake. So I ended up going into the Navy in October 1979, and they said I was only 15 and a half. They said by rights they should have waited till the January 1980, but they let me go anyhow. So that made me feel good, because with the other 59 buggers in me thing, I knew I was always going to be the youngest. So, you know, that was a really good feel. And so I started my career. The best feeling was going back to school and telling the teachers I didn't like, here's my acceptance letter, adios amigos, you know, and thanks for giving me hell or me giving them hell, you know, we were parting our ways. And so I came over here to Lewin and commenced 9 months training, and it was quite good, because I remember when we hopped off the bus at the Perth airport, and the Navy bus was waiting. There was us and I think the Victorians might have been with us at that stage, and we were all scoping each other out. And you know, 70s, everyone had long hair and, you know, looked like straight out of Cheech and Chong and that. And I remember the bus stopped outside the gate there at Lewin Barracks. Well, it's Lewin Barracks now, but it was HMAS Lewin then. And then the chief that had come and picked us up said, this is your last chance. You can hop off the bus now and change your mind. Nothing will be said. You'll just disappear, you know, discharge. But once you're through the gates, you belong to us. So, you know, we all sort of bouncing eyes off each other and seeing if anyone's going to do it. And we thought, no, we felt elite, because like I said, there was only 60 out of the whole of Australia, you know. A lot of people had applied. So, you know, it was really good. So then for the next 9 months, your first 3 months, you're known as a new grub. Then you become a grub. And then when you reach the last 3 months, you're known as a top sheet. And, you know, there was a hierarchy system. The top sheets could tell you what to do. And, you know, you got to remember, this is back in the late 70s. So, you know, there was still, I wouldn't say full-on bastardisation, but there was, you know, hard times. And, you know, a lot of us, it made you, you know, wake up really quick. If you thought you were tough on the outside, it was a bit of a wake-up call. You know, you were talking to people that had, you know, ex-Vietnam vets and stuff that probably enjoyed their moment of glory of giving, you know, 15-year-old smart asses a bit of a hard time. Anyhow, it made us into a real formidable team. And, like, I'm very close with, we become the 69th intake, and I think they went up to 86. So they'd started back in 1964, I think. And, yeah, we were just rapt to be known as the 69ers. Funny that. And, but we're very close today. We've got our own, you know, Facebook page and chat pages, and we're always checking up on each other. And, you know, that's lasted, you know, 40 odd years now. So it was a great journey. But then when we left there, we all parted and went to our own, whatever category you were going to. So some of the guys that went to the Naval Air Station at Nowra in New South Wales, I didn't, like one I had, Andy Martin, I'd only run into him for the first time a few months ago since we'd left Lewin. but we just spoke like we just hadn't seen each other for a couple of days. So, so once we sort of spread through and you went to your different category schools and all that, you might pass each other out in the fleet. But then when we left there, we all went to different classes of ships and that. So you knew you'd gonna cross paths somewhere along the line. So once we did that, I joined. I was a weapons mechanic, and we changed over to quartermaster gunner. So I was looking after all small arms weapons from pistol right up to the 5-inch turret-mounted weapons, and so we were known as the Seaman Department, or known as Dib Dabs, because we spent a lot of time painting. The upper decks was our little thing, so we're short term, we're just known as Dibbies. And that was really good because I enjoyed it, because the class of guys I met, through my gunnery class, and then every ship I went to, it was just, I first went to sea at 16, and actually funny about that, I went on HMAS Torrens in 1980, and we were actually put on standby if the Brits needed us when the Falklands started. I was told, you're going to be underage by that stage, and I would have still been just 17, nearly 18, and they said, we'd have to land you. I thought, no, you're not. It's like a fireman. Doesn't matter what age I am. If there's a fire, I'm going to fight a fire. But that never occurred. Never happened. So, that was a bit of excitement. I thought, you might get to put your handiwork to work. But then, so from there, Torrens was a destroyer escort. That was really great. Fantastic crew, and it was, it helps if you've got a good skipper. A good skipper will help make your crew. And, we were lucky. We had a really good one. These, they call them white men. They were come up through the ranks and treated everyone just fantastic. And I was lucky through practically my whole career. I had good skippers every ship. And so the Torrens is a British-made ship. So we had to learn all the British-made systems of the layouts of how they name their decks, compartments and all this. Well, they sort of categorise you as one of those, a Brit ship sailor. And once I left there, I went to a training ship for a year. That was the Jarvis Bay. That was like going on, well, it was known as the Love Boat. Going from a warship where everything is, timings and everything, going to a training ship was just, it was training for navigation for junior officers and that. So, that was really laid back. We didn't have any weapons except for, small arms. And so there was no, major systems that we had to learn. Did that for a year. I went ashore to a base in New South Wales, Waterhen, and they put me on a torpedo recovery vessel, which is just a elongated fishing boat, and we used to go 40 miles off the coast, and when the submarines used to fire their practice torpedoes, we'd recover them, and I was a ship's diver by that stage, so I was a swimmer all the time, so, they'd turn the engines off and I'd have to swim for, half a K to try to find these torpedoes and hook them up with nose cages or a hook, and then get scull dragged back to the boat, which didn't make me feel good because I'd seen all sorts of sharks. We know them as Noahs. I'd seen bronzies out there and everything, and here they were. I had a line around my waist and they'd be winching me back in really fast, and I thought, I am the worm on the end of this hook. And, I really didn't really enjoy it because you're literally 40, 50 miles off the coast. And but I did that for about 6 months, and then they transferred me to a diving tender vessel, SEAL. So we used to take the Navy's clearance divers out and take them up to Port Stephens for their dives, or off the shelf for their deep dives, and sometimes we'd put the decompression chamber on. And now these are only small crews. I think there's 9 of us on that, but geez, that was fun. It was real McHale's Navy, and I had this great boss, and it was an open bridge, and so you wore the waves, and he'd be sitting there, and he used to smoke his pipe, and he had his big beard, and he epitomised what I thought as a really old sea dog, salty sailor. And I remember sometimes when we were going out of Sydney, he'd be sitting in his chair, and we'd be bringing waves over, and I'd just watch him. He'd turn his pipe upside down, duck his head, the wave would go over, he'd turn it back up, take a couple of puffs, and then tell me I was 2 degrees off course, like this. And I just think, this man is a legend, and I'd never really thought about smoking, but the pipe smoke he used to do was just, it was a beautiful amphora, and I used to sit there and think, if you ever want a photo of somebody who looks like has been at sea for 100 years, this is the person. Lovely old bloke. And, he was sort of like the grandfather that age, that you would have loved to have, because, there was always a story in that. But so that was really good fun. I left there and rejoined the ship HMR Swan in Williamstown in refit, and I was only on her 8 days, and myself and one of the guys, we got hit by a car one night out on the town, and that was me in hospital for 7 months, getting rebuilt. The whole right side was pretty smashed up, and thanks to the Navy, they could have discharged me. If I was Army or Air Force, I would have been medically discharged right there and then. But the Navy stuck with me, and I ended up going back to Cerberus, where I did my category training and was attached to the hospital there. And I was lucky. I was at my peak fitness. I was only 20, just turned 21, like a couple of days after the accident. And they told me if I don't do anything, I'll be cactus for the rest of my life. So I got into as much exercise as I could, and had a good mate who used to take me down to the local swimming pool about 30 k's away every couple of times a week to get me in the pool, whether I wanted to go or not. He'd go, well, I'm not going anywhere until you get in that bloody pool. So, that helped me, and so I slowly recovered doing that. They sent me on sea trials on one of the patrol boats that was attached to the base, and and I tried not to let the injury, especially to my arm. I have permanent damage to my arm, and lost nerves, and it was a real struggle. But I thought, I'm not going to let this beat me, because this is my love. So I finally passed everything, and my specialist was really wrapped with my recovery. It took me years. I was down at the base for 3 and a bit years, with probably about 4 major operations in that time. So I had to recover every time. And just before they were going to let me go back to sea, I went for a ride in my motorbike, went over the handlebars and snapped the other one. So I wasn't really in anybody's good books. And my specialist, and I'm going to swear here, but I went to his rooms in Victoria, and it was in Toorak in Victoria, so very snooty. He does all the TV celebrities and that, and he was a mister, not a doctor. He's known as Mister. And as soon as he saw me walk in that thing, and it was all these celebrities sitting down the side of the room and all, looking at me like that, and he come out and he saw me, and he yelled out at the top of his voice, he goes, "Right, fuck knuckle, come here." And the whole room went quiet, and I thought, I'm really in deep shit now. And because the nurses told me afterwards, he's never said bloody in his life. And here he is, he really ripped into me, and he rebuilt my left side, and that was a bit of a setback, but I ended up in 1989, or the beginning of 1990, they asked me if I wanted to go to HMAS Hobart, which was a destroyer, guided missile destroyer, an American class. So that's a totally different kettle of fish. I've just learned all the Brit systems. Now I'm using ships that have got American systems. So that they are, like I said before, chalk and cheese. Very, very different thing. I loved it. They were great. They were a big ship with a crew of 350, and that, which was probably the biggest cruise that we were taking out. And the three girls, I was on HMAS Hobart, there was Perth and Brisbane, and we were all very close, and hated anybody that wasn't known as a DDG sailor. That's the designation. DD is destroyer and G was guided. So if you didn't do DDGs, you were ass piss in our book. That's how we used to look at it. So, the rivalry with all my mates on all the other classes, was really good. But I spent 3 years on her, left her, and on her in that time, I went to RIMPAC 92, which is big exercise to hold every 4 years off Hawaii, and it's the rim of the Pacific. And all the countries on the rim of the Pacific, allied obviously, are all invited to that. Well, 92, they actually held it out off San Diego. So we went to San Diego, and that was great. We had like a month, 5 weeks, in and out of San Diego, which is really good. When we went to Pearl Harbor on the way over, we detached and we went to Maui. We were the only ship out of our task group that was invited to Maui. So, we were chuffed about that too, because there was no competition then. And so a lot of people in Maui. Anyhow, so after we did that, after I left the Hobart, I went to HMAS Success, a tanker, for a year. So there was a totally different system. And but it was great because we were, there was never a shortage of anything. We carried everyone's stores. You didn't have to watch your water usage or, I just really enjoyed that because it was something totally right out of left field of anything else I'd done. From there, I went back to sea. No, I stayed there for a year, and I was due to come ashore because they have sea-shore ratios. And the only billet they could find for me in Sydney, because I wanted to stay in Sydney, was working for the Army. So I went to Vic Barracks in Paddington and worked in a unit called PMCC, which is a movement cells. Now that's all clerical work. Me, I was a two-fingered typist. I only just learned to spell my name because I had it written on my shirt, and I think, here they are, they've got me doing all this clerical stuff. So what it was any Navy courses that were being held within country, I'd organise all their flights and their transfers. I didn't have to do their incidentals because we had writers that did that. But the Army, there was probably about 40 people in the unit. They had to do all that sort of stuff. So I thought, well, I'm glad that, I'm not having to do that because that's something they got trained to learn to do. Lo and behold, they got snowed under. They asked me if I'd help them out. I thought, they're not really asking me. The OC of the unit and the warrant officer too are sort of telling me I'm going to be helping them out. So I ended up doing the Special Forces movements for the cadre course for the SAS and the commandos and that. But they still wanted me to do all the incidentals, and being a weapons handler. I chew on crayons. No, not that bad. But, so I did that for about a year, and my shore time came up, and they asked me would I like to go back to Hobart. And I said, yes, I damn sure would. And went back for another 3 years on her. And after I left Hobart, I posted ashore to HMAS Cairns. So I moved up to Cairns. I'd taken the girl at the time and married her, and we were living in Cairns, and I was going to be commissioning crew on one of the landing craft, big landing craft heavy we had, HMAS Weewak. So by this stage it was 2000. So Interfet was happening in Timor, and they had 5 landing craft running, back and forth non-stop, and they wanted this 6th one in the water. So this one had been decommissioned ages ago. We didn't even have a bow door or anything, so they rushed through, and we had to get this boat ready to go to join the fleet, because the 6th one would take up a bit of the, give them a bit of a break, bit more of a break for the other 5 crews. And so that was really a rushed thing. It was enjoyable. I learned a lot of things because I've become a load master. I had to go down to the Naval Air Station and be a load master underneath the helicopters, dropping loads, and I'd be working with the engineers on the boat for when bringing heavy loads on. So I'd have to make sure that I knew what was going on with all the manifest, all the weights were right, so that they could ballast the landing craft properly and tell me where they'd want me to park different items. And by the time we joined the fleet over there, the rest of the other guys, Interfed had stopped, and we came under UNTAYET, which is the UN authority, East Timor. And so we were answerable to the United Nations. So that's why I have my blue beret over there. And but the work tempo never eased. We were constantly, it was, if you've ever, well, you've never been over there, but the roads are that dangerous, and they were having a lot of accidents. It was actually quicker for us to do a 12-hour trip, taking loads around the bottom of Timor and going on the beaches down there and offloading down there than it was for them to try to go cross country. The one thing I really enjoyed about that, I worked with South Koreans, Bangladesh, Turkish, Irish, so we got to work with all these different nationalities, which was an eye-opener, and so I spent Christmas 2000 and New Year's there, which is good because I reckon we had the best chef in the small boats fleet, and his name got around a lot. So we invited the Army in their LCM-8s, which are very small landing craft. We got to know the crews really good. So we had on our tank deck, we set up a big table and had a big Christmas do, and the Christmas meal was just, duck's guts. It was absolutely great. So, really bonded us with the Army there. And so when I came back from there, I went ashore at the base for a bit. From the base, I was trying to get back to sea, and they asked me would I help fill in on HMAS Ipswich, which was a Fremantle class patrol boat. So I went to Ipswich for probably about 6 months, and that was really good. I was actually on her. We went down for the fleet review in September of 2001, and we were anchored in Jervis Bay when the Twin Towers came down. Now, I remember that day, the guy that was on watch before me, all the major fleet was down the southern end of Nowra. We were the only boat anchored right up the northern end. And he's come down, woke me up and said, "You got to come and see this." I was thinking, "Yeah, you woke me up bloody early." And he had the TV on, and I'm watching these planes hit the towers, and I thought, what movie is this? Well, I think I've watched every DVD and that. And he goes, "This has just happened." And I'm going, "What?" I was still trying to wake up and going, "Yep, this has just happened." So I told him, "Look, go wake up the skipper, the XO, start getting everyone up." I said, shit's just hit the fan. And sure enough, the radio traffic happened, and everyone had to up anchor and sail, just in case nobody knew what would happen. There could be people in explosive boats or anything. They just wanted us out of this safe harbour. And we sailed from there. We still went down to Tassie, so that was a nice trip for a Cairns boat to end in Hobart, but we didn't really enjoy it because the security tempo had really lifted. So where we were going to berth would have been just right next to all the pubs. we ended up down the end of a lonely wharf and ended up having to stand sentry duties on gates 24/7, and it wasn't a really great trip. I left there, came back to Cairns. My time was up on her. They asked me, the posters rang me and said, "Look, would you like to go to HMAS Canimbla?" And I thought, why not? So I joined Canimbla, which is one of those big LPAs, they were called, and they were horrible ships, but the crew was great, and so I did my Christmas Island runs on her. So when they were doing all the refugee and boats coming in, we'd be going out and patrolling up there. So that come under the Border Protection Act, which is one of the medals you can see behind me is Border Protection. And we were there for Operation Relics 1 and 2. And when I left there, I came back to Cairns, and I was, wanted to stay there for a bit, but then I started to get itchy feet again. Thought, I can hear the ocean calling me. So they said, join a ship, HMAS Parramatta, which is one of the Anzacs at the time, down in Melbourne, which is in refit, the same place I'd joined the ship that... no, actually, that one wasn't. Sorry, my apologies. That was at sea. And I got down there, and medically I wasn't fit for sea, so I missed that posting. I thought, this is great. My wife at the time was still in Cairns, and she wanted to know what the hell was going on. I thought, I'm stuck here at this base. And the posters were trying their best to help me get back to sea, and I thought, I'm coming up to the end of my time. And they offered me Stuart, one of the guys had broken his leg, and they said, look, we're looking for a replacement. Would you like to join her? Which is a sister ship of Parramatta. And I took that, and which is great. The skipper and the crew were just absolutely fantastic. And we ended up going to the Second Gulf War in 2004 to do our turn up in the Persian Gulf, looking after the 2 oil terminals that are just off the Iraqi coast and that. That was interesting, going through the Straits of Hormuz, because the Iranians think they own that, and every ship that goes through at full speed, and yet they still come out and buzz us with their helicopters, and we're doing everything to try and antagonise us. It's not very wide, so that's the last place you'd like to, not a lot of room to manoeuvre if shit went down. So we were over there doing our thing, just doing our normal patrolling and boarding parties. Now, I was a boat driver for one of the boarding parties, and we worked with USS Firebolt, which was a American patrol boat, and a couple of the Coast Guard cutters and that. And the 2 oil terminals were probably about 3-4 mile apart, and the Firebolt crew were up near the northern one. We were down near the southern one, and their crew, their boarding party, were told to come down and board a boat near our oil terminal, and we were meant to go up there. The Yanks swapped with us, and I wasn't on the boat that day. I was up on the upper deck, and I'm on watch up there, looking after the guns crews up there, and one of my boys goes, I can see smoke up there, and I jumped on the big eyes and looked, and massive explosion had happened. I could see a boat upside down, and when the Yanks had got alongside one of the fishing boats, it exploded, and I could see people in the water trying to struggle stay afloat. I watched the whole Persian Gulf emptied. There's thousands and thousands of fishing boats. It literally emptied out in a matter of minutes, and I let the skipper and the principal warfare officer know. He said, look, you might want to come up and have a look through big eyes. I said, there's been a massive explosion up towards the other oil terminal, and they come up and looked. We directed our helicopter over there, and sure enough, it had. They waited till they got alongside and detonated this explosion.
Yesterday, 3 waterborne IED attacks occurred near oil terminals located in northern Iraqi Gulf. No reported damage to the tankers or terminal, although the attack resulted in 2 U.S. killed and 4 U.S. wounded.
It killed 3 of them, and 5 of them were pretty badly injured. Well, we were the biggest ship in the Gulf at that time, so they were ferrying both the deceased and the wounded back to us, so our doctor and medical teams could do the best for them, and that really got to me. I mean, we'd worked with these guys for a few months by then, so got to know them really well on that, and that's one of my memories that I'll take with me to the grave, because I helped carry, all these personnel on board the ship and that. And but the only good thing that came out of it would have been our people. The Yanks at the last minute said, "We'll do yours, you do ours." So, not being disrespectful for them, but we really dodged the bullet. And after that, that's when the Yanks flooded the Persian Gulf. We had aircraft carriers and all their latest ships in there and that, because it was pretty low key at that time. On the 2 terminals, while that explosion went off on the north one, while we were looking through these big-eyed binoculars, we were only about probably a mile and a bit off the other terminal, and we could hear machine gun fire, and we're like, is that coming from over there? And next thing, there was a massive explosion, and what it was, terrorists the oil terminals were bringing in 100 million US a day, and they were trying to get underneath the terminals to blow up the terminals. And at that time, the Iraqi Republican Guard were guarding them, and it was their machine guns we could hear, and they hit this boat, and it either it exploded from them or he self-exploded, but it rocked the ship. I mean, I can still feel that, shockwave when the ship, we literally rocked, and they'd packed that much stuff into them. Their boats, they call them cigarette boats. They used to bring out, all supplies, foods and stuff, and go around to all the fishing fleets, and they were like floating supermarkets and that, so they could pack a lot in these, probably as wide as, that room just about. And we went to action stations. Now, that happened on 24th of April 2004, so it was Anzac Eve, and we were still at action stations till probably about 5 o'clock in the morning. Everyone was closed up. Sandstorm had come in, so visibility was down. Tensions were really running high because nobody knew what was going on. Everything was shut down to the outside world, so nobody could email or get phone calls or anything, and until they could assess what was actually happening. And we still got up for dawn service, held dawn service, and later in the day, Firebolt came across and tied up next to us, because they used to refuel us off us anyhow. We'd do their laundry, the chefos would cook them good meals, give them a break from just being on a small patrol boat. And we had a big Memorial Day for them as well. So, Anzac Day's even more special for me now, because it all happened on that day. And I decided on the way home back to Australia, I thought, I'm coming up to 26 years now. I feel like I've done my bit, and I looked at the young guys. I was the lead hand in the mess, and, they were a great crew. But some of the guys hadn't been born when I joined up, and I thought, I'm a dinosaur now. I've spent probably 20 odd years out of 26 at sea, and that was only due to my car accident. I would have spent more time. And, I thought I've enjoyed it as much as I can, but now's maybe time, while I'm still young enough to get out and get a job and see what the outside world was like. So, and then after I came back from the Gulf, it had changed me a bit, and I just I was struggling to find myself again. So, I sort of took that off the cards, which is a pity because, like, all my nieces and nephews think the world of me, and I've got a lovely little granddaughter now, and she just absolutely adores Poppy and loves my beard. So, this is it for the rest of my life because I'll shave it off. She'll never come near me and that. So, I came back, discharged. I was doing odd jobs around Cairns. I ended up driving for Toll. I worked for Schweppes. Worked in a steel factory for a month. I did a Tandy shop front fit. I just put my hand up for whatever, just to see what I'd like. But ultimately, I wanted to get into mining because I thought that's where the dollars are over here. And my marriage had started to, we were going separate directions. And I was offered a position, one of my mates that I'd known since cadets, lives up here in Clarkson, and I'm godfather for his one of his girls. Lovely family, and I love him dearly. Always have. And he was a digger op for Henry Walker's, and he said, "Look, I'm going to ask and see, what we could do." And I got a phone call. "I hear you're looking for a start in mining. Would you be willing to move over here?" I said, "The bags are packed." So in 2008, I moved over here. One of my old Navy bosses, before I discharged, was living here in Warnbro, and he always said, "If you ever come west, love to catch up." Well, when I told him I was coming west, and he goes, "Where you living?" I said, "Nowhere." And he'd split up with his wife and had his 2 kids with him, which were in their teens, and he said, "Move in with us." So I spent the next 4 years living with him, and then this house that I'm in now came up in 2013. I managed to buy this house, and without selling a kidney, which I'd have to do today. And I've been here ever since. I ended up doing 15 years mining. I worked for a few different companies. Henry Walker's was bought out by BHP. I became a trainer, and that's so I was training on all the different trucks, the cat trucks, and did loader work and water carts and all that. I left BHP after about 10 years, 10, 11 years. Went up to Karratha, got a job with Citic Pacific, and had to learn electric trucks. Now, that's another chalk and cheese story. It was, I just wanted to get the experience up. They were paying good dollars. That was the other thing that really got me. I stayed there for 6 months. Things didn't really work out. I wasn't really enjoying it. Every day was, in summer it was always, high 40s and that. I just thought, look, I'm not enjoying it. It's just not me. I left there and came back and ended up getting a job with Mineral Resources, and finished out the rest of my time out near Cooling Nobbing and Windarling, and out towards Southern Crossway, and enjoyed that. And then I thought, you know what? I started to have little. I saw a couple of things out at site that triggered me about the 2004 attacks, and I really started to get black dog issues, and I didn't know who to talk to or anything, and I was lucky. I talked to one of the supervisors, and he said, "Look, I want to bring in one of the superintendents," and they couldn't do enough for me. They said, "Look, if you wake up and you're just really struggling, just send me a message. We'll get someone to come and check up on you. Afterwards, don't come in to work." And they were really lovely and accommodating. And I was lucky that the medic on site was a combat medic. He'd just come back from the sand pit, Afghanistan, and he said, "You ring me any time." So he'd make coffee and come over and sit me 2, 3 in the morning or something. If I just felt like sometimes my cabin was literally being squeezed like a toothpaste tube, and I was really struggling, and I was bringing issues home here, and I said, "Look, I think I'm done. I'm done. So I was already gold card with Vet Affairs, and I had a really great advocate here, and who couldn't do enough for me, and he helped me achieve my TPI status, and that's me now. I'm retired and probably busier than I've ever been in my life, because everyone wants a piece of me. They know I'm home all the time. So, you know, it's been a great transition my whole life. You know, everything has been a matter of circumstance, and you know, if I took one of those components out, I wouldn't be sitting here now. You know, so even after my car accident, they said, somebody asked me one day, would you go back for all that pain and suffering you went through? And I said, yes, I'd have to. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. You know, so I've just been very lucky. And in that time, sorry, I forgot to add, 1996, come back from a deployment, pulled into Darwin, I got a letter saying, we think you're our long lost brother. Now, I'd never thought about trying to find my real family. Apparently, they'd been looking for me for a lot of years. Every time ships would pull into Stokes Hill Wharf in Darwin, they'd go down and try to find out anything about me and try to find me. Well, this letter arrived, and that was 35, 36 years on. And my mate's going, you're right. And I said, read this. And it had a number there and said, you know, had all my birth date, my name correct and all this. And they said, ring us. And I was in Darwin and I couldn't do it. I said, my mate said, we'll do it for you. And I said, look, don't. I said, it's caught me unprepared. What if I don't look anything like him? What if I have nothing in common? What if I don't like what I see? What if, you know, there were so many what ifs. I said, I can't just take this in, you know, this quick. So it took me about a year to finally agree. And one of my best childhood mates, who's a barrister now in Adelaide, which is funny because both me and him were always in the shit at school, always, but he's a top barrister, and he had a barbecue around his house, and he's my older brother who lives here in WA, and two of the sisters were going to be in Adelaide at that time. I was over at my mate Sean's place, and he teed it up for him to come over for this barbecue and we'd meet. And I remember sitting out the back and I was smashing the long necks in because I was that nervous. I said, I don't know. You know, I've never known this side of the family, you know. And as I said before, a lot of ifs, you know. And I remember when I heard the car door shut, and I thought, I'm going to pass out here. My heart was just going. My older brother, Wayne, walked around the corner, and the first thing I did, and I'll show you a photo afterwards, but I looked at him and I said, that bugger's got my face. And I thought, I know I belong. Then, you know, it's just come around and we connected straight away. There was no doubt about it. And so I'd learned that I'd gone from, you know, my two brothers in my adopted family to two other brothers and 5 sisters and about 1,000 nieces and nephews. And it was so exciting, and pity my dad had passed away by that stage, but mum's still alive and she was chuffed. You know, they'd told me from a young age that I'd been adopted, and if I ever wanted to, you know, try to find the family, they would help me in every endeavour. But, you know, my loyalty was to them. They'd had me from, I think, about 6 weeks old. You know, I had known nothing else, and everything I'd achieved in my life was what they had done and made me the person I am. You know, and so I didn't want to pursue it. But then when it happened, I wanted, you know, Mum was stoked, but I wanted her to be part of it. And, you know, I was welcome to the family. It was really great, but they still hadn't found an elder sister. And she'd been living under their nose the whole time in Darwin. It was one of the nieces said, you know, to Betty, who was my birth mother, said, Mum, or Nan, there's a woman on the bus that looks just like you. and it turned out it had been the last link to the family, the elder sister, and she'd been seeing her every day. And so once we were together, and I'll show you that photo, our first meeting of all the family, and we had a welcome to family thing, not like a welcome to country, a total just really good, you know, get to find out who we are and that. I was pretty stoked. Two of my sisters were cops, territory cops. My older brother, he'd been in Norforce and that. And everyone else had been successful. I just thought, well, I was just a, you know, bum sailor, you know, getting drunk in ports all over the place, you know. But so, you know, it was such a great time, and it was good because one time Betty come down. I call her Mum now. So Mum came down and met my mum, and they had the photo albums out, and I think that's great because Mum was in her late 80s and Betty was in her early 80s, and I'm glad that they got to meet. And so myself and Wayne just let them talk, you know, and they cried and had the photo albums out, and you know, and I think that was good for both of them. And but the story, they were lucky to even get me. Like I said, everything with me has been circumstance. Mum told me they were getting a little girl, adopting a little girl, and then at the nth hour, the mother decided they didn't want to have the girl adopted. They said no, and so Mum and Dad didn't know what to do, and they were told by the adoption agency that you know, I'd been born and I was available, and they took me. So once again, you know, it was all circumstance. If I don't know what I would have done, where I'd be, you know, no matter what I'd do, I'd make the most of it. But you know, I've just been very lucky in my life's been one journey, and there's a million stories within stories. So, you know, like people keep telling me to write a book, you know, and I thought, yeah, but where would I start? You know, but I think you've got everything now, literally from the start right through to me sitting in this chair talking to you. The thing about the Britannia, 1982 Torrens, when I was on Torrens, we were the Royal Escort. So, well, every country they go to, the ship will provide a Royal Escort. So Torrens was the Royal Escort for that period of time. She was in Australian waters, and or on the eastern coast anyhow. And they selected me as well as a couple of the other young fellas. We were still, you know, junior to the ship and that, and I was the sentry on the end of the royal gangway. So any time the Queen and Prince Philip left, they'd always have a sentry down the end, and so you know, I thought that was quite an honour. You know, that you had to make sure everything was, you know, highly polished. You were spick and span. You know, you had to look the goods. Your drill had to be immaculate. You know, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. So I managed to get over there. There's a plaque of Britannia and a tally band. A couple of times then when the weather, we were down in Melbourne, when the weather is inclement, they call us in out of the weather because there wasn't going to be any royal movements and that. And I got a tour of the whole of Britannia and, you know, the areas that they could go to, and they said, look, thanks for, you know, a good job, and they presented me with a plaque and a tally band to you know, commemorate it, which to me is a huge honour because there is no royal yacht now, and you know, that had been all over the world. I'd watched it as a kid on TV, you know, and here I was, you know, every time they did come down, you know, Prince Philip would always make sure he'd come over to me and, you know, and say good morning and, you know, give me a nod, and, you know, I felt quite special. You know, the focus was on me for that split second. You know, I thought, geez, it was only not that long ago I was getting in trouble with cops. You know, and now look at me. I'm, you know, transition has been great. So, you know, yeah. So that was that story. I always remember when I was young and old enough to understand, Dad sat me down and he had a really good talk. And he said, Chris said, this is the talk we need to have. He said, because of my background, he said, remember, everything you do, you're going to be judged by the colour of your skin. And he said, look people straight in the eye. He said, speak the truth. Believe in yourself. He said, you're no different to anybody else. And he said, give nobody a reason to not like you. And, you know, I took that all through school and never had any issues. I never come across any racism, you know, because I was just one of everybody else. You know, I didn't try to step outside of who I was because I didn't have to prove anything to anybody. You know, either people are going to like you or they're not, you know, but I'm not going to let them ever use my Aboriginality as an excuse, same as I'm not going to use it as an excuse. You know, we're seeing the world in the same way as each other. Doesn't matter what colour skin. That's just, kids don't see colour. Why should everyone else, you know? And that's one thing I've loved, and all my mates through the Navy over all the years, you know, I've got, you know, thousands of mates on my Facebook page that I've all served with, you know, and we could catch up tomorrow. I might not have seen them for 40 odd years, and we'd just pick up the conversation. You know, that's how much respect that we had for each other, and you know, it was a real brotherhood and sisterhood. Like, I've got a lot of female sailor friends that I used to help out. Sometimes they'd come to me, you know, just junior girls on some of the ships because I was the older one, and they'd sit down and they'd be telling me stuff. I'd sit there and think, what? You know, you're asking me for like fatherly advice. But, you know, I did help out a couple with getting themselves, you know, reset. And, you know, that made me feel good that they trusted me enough to come and tell me some, you know, very intimate stuff and that, you know. And I had one of the female officers come up to me and she said, and it actually embarrassed me at the time, but I feel humbled about it now. She said, the girls call you Father Teresa. And I thought, what? You know, I nearly fell over, and she goes, I appreciate it, because she goes, I can talk to them, but sometimes they just need, you know, a bit of wise words. So, you know, I just thought my dad instilled this in me. You know, he gave me the strength and the fortitude to tackle things. You know, don't be scared. You know, you can be whoever you want to be, but how you get there is the important thing. You know, stay humble, and everything will just, like my whole life has, just slot into a place, and your gears will just purr away. You know, if you try to buck systems and try to change who you are, yeah, that becomes a hurdle. And yeah, so that's how I've lived my whole life, and still will. And, you know, people say, you know what, you haven't changed. And I go, you're right, I won't. Because I wouldn't like that person. You've got to like yourself before you can help anyone else. So that's my words of wisdom.